Good morning, Ermina. Tapan Mishra here.
Good morning. Good morning, Tapan. Very nice to see you.
Yeah, Ermina, it's okay. I can understand and appreciate the challenges people are having. And since the theme of our meeting today and sessions are about leaving no one behind, we cannot leave anybody behind. Let's get them. Maybe for this session, I understand the need for having clear registration for everybody, but make sure to have more participation. If we can find an easier way to have everybody access, let's find that in terms of, so that nobody is left behind for the access to technology. Right?
This is very well said and very, to the point of our meeting is that
it's okay. So no problem at all. I'm happy to stand by. I have a 9:30 meeting with some UN colleagues coming from Uzbekistan.
Okay, absolutely. We will get started.
Standing by. I understand that yesterday evening, Minister Arunzai called me and we had a long discussion. Hostlin is there, I think, from MOLSP. And so yesterday, Minister did call me and we had a long conversation about many things, including this. So hopefully, so is she joining in person or is it recorded?
No, she couldn't join through the online live by herself, and we have the pre-recorded video of her opening remarks.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Hussein. So anyway, so I'm standing by. Ermina, whenever you're ready. Yes. And when Hussein says that everybody's logged in and we have not left anybody behind, I'm happy to come in. So I'm standing by.
Thank you. Let's do, well, we're at 32 participants. Maybe we wait one more minute and then Sujal, we can start. I think we can start with a record, with a message and, right? Okay, one more minute.
Let's do that, Miss Ermina. Let's wait one more minute and
okay, let's start. Perfect. Thank you.
Should I begin now? I think we've given, okay. Sorry everyone for the difficulties in joining, and hopefully as we continue, we'll have more participants able to join. So let's begin. Hello and welcome to our introduction to the Leaving No One Behind analysis. I am Sejal, and on behalf of our LNOB team, we are very excited to share the work with you today. Just a few reminders for the session before we begin. Today we are grateful to have two interpreters with us, Selenge and Bulgan. They are on the translation channel, so if you'd like the simultaneous Mongolian translation, you can click on the globe icon at the bottom of the Zoom page and choose Mongolian as your language. Please keep your microphones on mute throughout this session. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat and one of us will get back to you as soon as possible. Later in our training, we're going to be using Mentimeter, which is an interactive question application. So if possible, if you can have a secondary device on standby, it can be your phone or a tablet, that would be helpful. Or you can alternatively also just use an internet browser to answer the questions. If you have any trouble getting onto Mentimeter, you can direct message me in the chat. My name is spelled Sejal. Today we have the privilege of having opening remarks by 3 distinguished individuals. Let us start with a video from Her Excellency Ms. Arunzaya Ayush, the Minister for Labor and Social Protection of Mongolia.
Сайн байцгаана уу та бүхэнд энэ өдрийн мэндийг хүргье. Аз номхон далайн бүс нутгийн олон оронд тэгш бус байдлыг арилгахад тэмцэл болол явагдаж байна. За тэгш бус байдлыг хэмжих нөгөө талдаа хамгийн их одоо дэмжлэг шаардлагатай байгаа хүн амын бүлгийг тодорхойлох арга хэрэгсэл байхгүй болол альва одоо бодлого хэмжигдэхгүй байгаа бол тухайн үр дүнгийн ч гэсэн одоо тооцоход хэцүү байдаг. Тэгэхээр NOB-ийн эдийн засаг нийгмийн хорооноос санаачлан боловсруулсан хөгжлөөс хэнийг ч хоцроохгүй байх аргачлал одоо төсөл нь бодлого боловсруулахыг бол дэмжих зорилгоор ялангуяа COVID-19 цар тахлын үед бодлого боловсруулагчдад тэгш бус байдлыг хэрхэн яаж ойлгох уу, хэрхэн яаж хэмжих үү. За нэг ялангуяа хамгийн алслагдсан газар байгаа хүн амын бүлгийг хэрхэн яаж тодорхойлох вэ гэдэг дээр илүү одоо шинэлэг хэрэглэхэд хялбар одоо цахим буюу одоо зайнаас онцлох боломжтой ийм аргачлалыг хөгжүүлэхэд зорьсон ийм төсөл хөтөлбөр байгаа юм а. Энэхүү төсөл нь Аз номхон далайн бүсээс Энэтхэг, Монгол, Филиппин, Тонга, Туркменистан гэсэн одоо 5 улс орн сонгогдсон байгаа. Тэгээ энэ 5 улс орны нэг болсондоо бид нар бол бас маш их баяртай байгаа юм аа. Боловсрал, эрүүл мэндийн тусламж үйлчилгээний хүртээмж бол нэг чухал байдаг. За тэрнээс гадна ундны ус, ариун цэврийн байгууламж, за эрчим хүч, интернетийн хүртээмж зэрэг одоо салбаруудыг хамарч энэ хүртээмж нь одоо яг тэгш байна уу үгүй юу гэдэг энэ ойлголтыг бий болгох ийм одоо төсөл гэж ойлгож байгаа. За 2030 он хүртэл энэхүү төсөл хэрэгжинэ. За доктортой хөгжлийн хөтөлбөр туссан үзүүлэлт дээр тулгуурлан тэгш бус байдлыг одоо хангах бодлогын хэрэгжилтийг одоо тэгш бус байдлыг арилгах тийм ээ одоо тэгш бус байдлыг байхгүй болгох бодлогын хэрэгжилтийг сайжруулахын тулд бодлогын хэрэгслүүрүүдийг одоо зөв үнэлгээ дүгнэлт хийх шинэлэг одоо аргачлал хэрэгслийг одоо нэвтрүүлэхэд чиглэж байгаа гэж ойлгоно. За энэхүү төслөөс үндсэн 2 үр дүн гарна гэсэн ийм хүлээлттэй байгаа. За хөгжлөөс хоцорч байгаа хүн амын бүлгүүдийг одоо тодорхойлох техникийн болон одоо техникийн тусалцаа үзүүлж нөгөө талдаа одоо мэрэгжлийн боловсон хүчний одоо чадварыг бэхжүүлэх юм байна. За хоёр дахь нь бол бодлого боловсруулж байгаа одоо хүмүүст эдгээр одоо үзүүлэлт шалгууруудыг хэрхэн яаж ойлгох уу? За хэрхэн яаж тэгш бус байдлыг арилгахад эдгээр үзүүлэлтүүдийг ашиглах вэ гэдэг дээр чадварыг одоо бас бэхжүүлэх юм байна гэсэн ийм одоо хоёр зорилготой төсөл хөтөлбөр юм. За өнөөдөр маргааш зохион байгуулагдаж байгаа энэхүү сургалт семинараар энэ төслийн хүрээнд хэрэгжүүлэх хэрхэн яаж одоо хэмжих үү, ямар үзүүлэлтүүд бий болох ёстой юм. За хамгийн алслагдсан хүн амын бүлгийг гэж одоо бүлэг гэж хэнийг ойлгох уу? Тодорхойлолт нь юу байх юм? За хамгийн хялбараар буюу одоо бас төрд байгаа мэдээллүүд дээр үндэслэн хэрхэн яаж энэхүү үзүүлэлт аргачлалыг илүү одоо цахимаар зайнаас онцлох одоо арга хэрэгслэр тодорхойлж болох вэ гэдгийг бол танилцуулах юм байна. За Монгол улсын хувьд олон жилийн туршид тулгамдж байгаа асуудлуудын нэг нь мэдээж одоо алслагдсан бүсэд тархаа бутархаа хүн амтай маш өргөн удам нутагт дэвсгэртэй яг 3 саяулаа мөртлөөсөө 1 квадрат километрт одоо 2 хүн оногдож байдаг. Тэгээд их тархаа бутархаа сууршилтаа манайх шиг улсад нийгмийн хамгаалал, төрийн үйлчилгээний тэгш хүртээмжийг хангахад бол их хүндрэлтэй байдаг. Ийм ч учраас бид нар цахимжуулалтыг илүү одоо нэвтрүүлж цахим Монгол хөтөлбөрийг хэрэгжүүлж байгаа. Энэхүү сургалт семинарын үндсэн зорилго нь хэрхэн яаж бусад улс орнуудтай адилхан энэ асуудлуудыг одоо шийдвэрлэх вэ? Хэрхэн яаж бодлогоодыг боловсруулах вэ? Хэрхэн яаж үзүүлэлтүүдийг одоо бас бий болгох вэ? За төрийн албан хаагчид болон бусад холбогдох талуудад тодорхой хэмжээнд одоо шийдвэрлэх, сайжруулахад төлөвлөж болох үс одоо асуудлуудыг бас гаргаж ирнэ гэсэн ийм хүлээлттэй байна. Ингээд сургалтын үйл ажиллагаанд амжилт хүсье. Баярлалаа.
Thank you very much. And next we have Mr. Tapan Mishra, the UN resident coordinator for Mongolia. And I invite him to say a few words.
Thank you, Sejal. Thank you, Ermina. Good morning. Sembetsgano, Ugluni Mint. I'm delighted to be here on this workshop for the Leaving No One Behind, which has been a major priority for the United Nations. I want to welcome all participants and thank UNESCAP for initiating this project in conducting the comprehensive Leave No One Behind analysis for Mongolia and for organizing this capacity building training. I would like to sincerely thank the Ministry for Labor and Social Protection and Minister Arunzaya and the UN Resident Coordinator's Office led by our team leader Doljin Surin for supporting and enabling this training to be organized today. And I welcome the government representatives and UN colleagues who are attending this training today. Leaving no one behind is the central and transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. It represents the unequivocal commitment for all of us to eradicate poverty in all forms, end discrimination and exclusion, and reduce the inequalities and vulnerabilities that leave people behind and undermine the potential of individuals and of humanity as a whole. Leaving no one behind means moving beyond assessing average and aggregate progress towards ensuring progress for all population groups at disaggregated level. This will require disaggregating data to identify who's being excluded or discriminated against, how and why, as well as who is experiencing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and inequalities. This will entail identifying just and unjust, avoidable and unavoidable and extreme inequalities in outcome and opportunities and patterns of discrimination in law, policies, and practices. As the Minister Arunzaya was saying, Mongolia is a huge country of 1.5 million square kilometers with a population of only 3.4 million, quite well dispersed all over the country, although half of them are here in the capital in Ulaanbaatar and 60% live in the Gare district. And I know that it is impossible to reach everybody in such a geographical dispersed terrain and challenging weather conditions, but it is even more important that we leverage the technologies that are there today to be able to reach out to every mulching, every herder, and every people in those bags, sums, and ayamugs all throughout the country. The United Nations in Mongolia prepared a comprehensive common country analysis, which identified the groups which are at risks in being left behind and has analyzed their vulnerabilities and root causes for being left behind. We have used that analysis for the new UN Cooperation Sustainable Development Framework, or the UN SDCF, for 2023 to 27 for Mongolia, and our country team is currently preparing that and also in touch with all these aspects and propose actions that are aimed to address these challenges of leaving people behind, especially the most vulnerable and the farthest left behind. The training organized by ESCAP in May last year to our UN colleagues introduced the initial tools for the Leave No One Behind analysis. And we also understood that the training today will present more advanced analysis that the ESCAP has been working on. The policy tools introducing must be very useful, especially for national policy making, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. The project developed an innovative, easy-to-use online diagnostic tool for policymakers to measure inequalities and identify the population groups farthest left behind in, for example, education, completing education, healthcare access to basic facilities like water, sanitation, clean energy, and the internet, like the minister was saying. It would also include COVID-19 pandemic-related indicators. Therefore, this workshop is very timely to help us better understand the methods for analyzing the Leave No One Behind analysis and learn how to apply them in policy-making processes and in our programmatic interventions to really reach those and really make it an inclusive and sustainable development for everybody in Mongolia, leaving no one behind. I trust that this workshop will also help in building our internal capacity on the implementation of root cause analysis, which is needed to understand what are the core reasons for these people that are left behind and how we can really overcome this challenge. I wish all the participants a very productive workshop and ensure that these follow-up actions that we decide can be taken, and we hope to see more strengthened integration of the Leave No One Behind approaches in SDG implementation in Mongolia to ensure that we really have an inclusive and sustainable development approach to the development planning that we are doing in Mongolia, together with the government and all other partners and stakeholders, to ensure that we are able to achieve the sustainable development goals in Mongolia. And I see Mongolia has the potential to be a role model country in the achievement of SDGs moving forward. So thank you all. Thank you and wish you a great meeting. Over to you, back to you, Sajid.
Thank you very much for those impactful and inspiring words. Next we have Mr. Patrick Anderson, who is the Chief of Sustainable Socioeconomic Transformation section at ESCAP. His section is responsible for the social protection and LNOB work at ESCAP. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, Sajal. Your Excellency, Minister Ayush, your resident coordinator, Mr. Mishra, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of ESCAP and our LNOB team, a very warm welcome and good morning to all of you to this first training on the ESCAP methodology for leaving no one behind. Today, we welcome 16 policymakers from 8 different ministries and institutions in Mongolia, 34 UN colleagues from 9 different UN agencies, funds and programs, as well as people from the academia. As you know, the Sustainable Development Goals cover a wide range of areas, and at the heart of these goals is the call to leave no one behind. Whether we work on health, on education, or on water and sanitation, our objective is the same: to include everyone in the development process and to realize everyone's rights. We hope that our methodology, which is applied to some 16 SDG indicators, will help you in your search to identify the furthest behind. We know there are limitations to our methodology. For example, not all population groups are covered by the surveys we use, and not all areas we may want to study are available. Still, from our perspective, this is the closest we get to a data-driven and automated evidence on the furthest behind groups and the range of inequalities they face. It's no coincidence that Mongolia is the first country in this series of trainings. The resident coordinators team has engaged with us with enthusiasm and dedication over the past couple of years. Together, we have developed our first LNOB results for the country and contributed to the Common Country Assessment, the CCA. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to my colleagues to begin the training that you're all here for, let me also thank our focal point in the Mongolian government, Ms. Sorik, and our focal point in the resident coordinator's office, Ms. Jambal. Your support and engagement has been instrumental in the lead up to where we are now. I hope everyone will join today's training, and very much looking forward to your active participation. Thank you so much, and I hope this will be a successful training.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patrick, for your inspiring words and also for your guidance on this project. So before we begin our training, we would like to give context to the phrase leaving no one behind, LNOB. It's a phrase we all have heard, but where does this phrase come from? What does it mean? And to do so, we've created a short video for you all capturing the objective and importance of leaving no one behind.
I didn't realize my 3-year-old son was ill. I thought he was small, just like me. I usually give all my children home remedies with leaves and coconuts when they get sick. The free health clinic is a 3-hour journey. When I finally made the trip there, they told me he was seriously ill. I had no idea. My son is now 5, but he still cannot walk. I live in the city. I never went to school. I work in 6 houses each day as a maid so I can send my kids to school. 5 years ago, my husband left. Our bank account was in his name. He took all the money I had earned. I still don't have a bank account in my name. When I was 7, my father moved away to work as a laborer. Being the eldest, I had to drop out of school to help my mother look after my 3 siblings. It took hours to fetch water and firewood each day so that my mother could cook and feed us all. I wish there was a well closer to our home, or that we had electricity, so I could go to school with my friends again. During the winter, most of our salaries are spent on coal. We eat less and don't buy any extra clothes. Our children are home for most of the winter because of high pollution levels. So to keep them warm, we need to burn even more coal. This makes the air at home very polluted, and our children keep falling sick. There are alternatives to burning coal, but they are too expensive for us to use. These are real stories, representative of countless similar struggles across Asia and the Pacific. Stories of inequality, of discrimination, and of access denied to basic services. Millions of children are malnourished, and many more drop out of school to help their parents. Too many people do not have their own bank account, and many households cannot afford clean fuels. Who are they? Where are they? How can we identify them? In response to such injustices, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development makes a call to leave no one behind. It represents the unequivocal commitment of UN member states to eradicate poverty in all its forms, end discrimination and exclusion, and reduce inequalities and vulnerabilities. To leave no one behind means providing access to basic services and opportunities universal, irrespective of a person's age, sex, ethnicity, wealth, or place of residence. It means upholding their right to access, enshrined in international human rights law and national legislation across the world. To inform action, we must first identify those deprived of access to rights-based services and opportunities. We need to know who these people are and the circumstances they share to effectively extend support. This training focuses on this first step. The United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific has developed the Leave No One Behind tool for this very purpose. It uses data and statistics to identify groups left furthest behind and the circumstances holding them back. In this training, we will cover how it works with the aim of using it to strengthen policy interventions for a more equal and inclusive Asia-Pacific region.
I hope these stories resonated with you as it has for us. To hear from those left behind, to find them, and to be able to include their voices is an ambition worth working towards. Though our analysis today is just the first step, we are confident that with your support, together we can carry forward the agenda to reach the furthest behind. Our intention is to use data-driven analysis, which we will show you today, to initiate this process of identifying the furthest behind. And with each of your individual expertise, combine the data and other important tools that will help create and implement policy changes and promote equal access for the furthest behind groups. So before we dive into the mathematical side of the training, I'd like to introduce our team for these next 2 days. My name is Sejal, as I told you before, and I have been working on the LNOB project at UNESCAP for just about a year now. My passion is to make complicated things simple and easy to understand, so hopefully today I will prove that to you all. And along with enjoying numbers and teaching, I love spending time in nature, creating art, and eating pizza. I'm from India, and I was born and raised in America, and now I live in the wonderful country of Thailand. Along with me is my colleague Ermina, who is in the Social Development Division at UNESCAP and is the visionary of the LNOB project. She has seen it through from the beginning until today. Ermina, could you kindly share a few words with everyone?
Good morning from me as well. My name is Ermina Sokou. I'm very pleased to be here at this first training. This is actually a little bit of a dream come true after a few years of having developed this work, to be able to share it with the UN country team and policymakers as well in Mongolia, one of the first countries that we started looking deeper into. My vision for this project also coincides with the SDG vision, and this is what has been guiding us throughout since we started doing this analysis 5 years ago. So a few things about me. I'm from Greece. I've been with the UN for about 15 years now, 14 years. And I also love all sorts of Thai food. And in particular, these days, I've been missing pork and sticky rice, which is a favorite of mine. So I look forward to hearing from you as well.
Thank you, Ermina. And also with us, we have Selsha, who is also a member of the Social Development Division at ESCAP and has brought his mathematical expertise to the LNOB project. Selsha, do you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you very much, Sejal. Good morning, everyone. My name is Selsha. I'm from Turkey. I recently joined ESCAP, and I have a PhD in development economics. And this tool has been a great piece of work for us to work on, for me also to get into. And I can't wait to help the team take you through this training, but also look forward to future cooperation in applying this tool to many other areas. The potential of the tool is quite big. So looking forward to this training and then expanding the work towards other areas. Thank you.
So again, a warm welcome from all of us for this training. And we'd also love to hear from every one of you. So if you'd like, can you please add your name, where you work in the chat box, and if you feel up for it, your favorite food. So Our LNOB analysis is composed of two major elements. The first is classification and regression trees, and the second is the dissimilarity index. Today, we are going to take you through what the CART algorithm is, and that the CART algorithm makes up the majority of our analysis. Tomorrow in session 2, we will go through the dissimilarity, which complements our CART algorithm and gives us a more holistic picture of what is happening to the furthest behind in countries. For today, our main goal is that everyone understands the complex yet useful algorithm. So truly, if you have any questions, please message in the chat and one of us three will get back to you with an answer as we go through the presentation. We've tried to break the material down into pieces and different ways of looking at the same information. So hopefully that will help, and any question is a good question. So feel free to use the chat box. So to start off with, I thought I'd give you a little bit of history on the origins of CART. CART it's somewhat difficult to pinpoint when it actually was created, but many people trace it back to 1936, which is a very long time ago. So through the years from 1936 to about 76, there were traces of the algorithm seen in various diverse publications. For example, in psychology, they saw that decision tree methods were used to model the human concept of learning. And somewhere along the way, as researchers read material on CART, they realized that the algorithm could also be useful for programming. And that is when the CART algorithm started appearing in something called automatic interaction detective work. AID work for short is essentially now one of the many components of artificial intelligence. From this work, there were 4 professors, 2 from the University of Berkeley and 2 from Stanford University, Leo Breiman, Charles Joel Stone, and Jerome H. Friedman and Richard Olshan, who began developing what we use today as the classification and regression tree algorithm. It was unveiled initially in 1977, but in 1984, we saw the first official publication along with a CART software. It was a revolution in the world of algorithms, because to manually compute these algorithms would take a very long time. So the second it integrated with artificial intelligence and software, it became more efficient and more robust and easier to access. So today, CART is one of the most efficient and intelligent methods for data segregation. So along with upgrades to statistical software, the algorithm itself has expanded in its capacity to adapt and for adaptability and accuracy. So even though it's just one word, CART, it has an umbrella of many different analyses that can be used. But today we are going to zoom in and focus just on the elements of CART that we use for our LNOB analysis. So just to start off, CART is also referred to as decision trees. And the reason for this is because it can be seen as a way to follow an intuitive decision process. So this is just a very simple example, but would you like to identify the furthest behind groups? Yes, then take the training. If not, would you like to identify the furthest ahead groups? Yes, please take the training. You guys are all here, so I know you're taking the training, but just a way to realize how the intuitive process works between yes or no. And if you would like to learn something new, yes, join the training. If not, well, then okay, goodbye. So it helps us map how we make decisions, how we think about things, and how different decisions lead us to different outcomes. And thank you all for falling in the yes bubbles. So our classification regression trees are made up of 2 categories. There are classification trees and regression trees. Classification trees work with models that use categorical variables, and regression trees work with numerical variables. In our analysis, we use regression trees, where we look at the percentage access of a country and groups within that country. So to the right, you can see a standard decision tree. For our analysis, we use the program R, and this is our standard output from R. So soon you will see, hopefully happy to see, that we have changed the trees so they are easier to interpret, easier to read, and more intuitive, and also easier on the eyes. But we'll let you guys be the judge of that. CART is the umbrella term for, as I mentioned before, there's many different aspects that fall under the CART umbrella. So the reason behind this is each one of these different methods guides the intention behind using a decision tree. So for instance, if we want to use predictive modeling, we would focus probably more on random forest. In our case, we are sorting through data and using it to find statistically significant splits. So for our trees, we only focus on a certain set of the large CART umbrella. And these are our roots. You can consider these as the roots of our LNOB tree. So the roots of our tree first include regression, as I mentioned earlier. We are creating the regression trees that calculate the average access rate, yes, for the country, but also at every node, which is at every group and split that we see, we are calculating the access rate for those groups. Second, our trees are binary, which means that every branch only splits into two possible directions. Third, we have to decide how our trees are being split. So how are we deciding which split is more significant than the other? And in our case, we use the analysis of variance, and ANOVA for short. ANOVA uses the sum of squares method for splitting the data to identify the highest variance. And lastly, we have defined and used a splitting criterion to check to see if a node should be split any further. And these elements together create the roots of our LNOB tree. Just a little, this isn't as important to understand, but for those of you that may understand, it's important to keep note that what we are using is ANOVA, and it's actually when we run the calculations, this is automatically being done by R. However, ANOVA is essentially a sum of squares, which many of you may be familiar with. If you're not, that is also okay. It's a way of viewing variance of a calculation of how much difference exists between two different groups. So before we dive into our LNOB trees, we've created a little animation to help you further understand the intuition behind decision trees. So this example will show you how we can actually apply CART in our everyday lives, and it will also show you a very simplified example of how it works in our LNOB trees.
To identify the furthest behind in key development areas, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific has developed a Leave No One Behind tool. This tool centers around the classification and regression trees, also known as CART. Let's start off with an intuitive example from daily life to explore how the CART methodology works. Meet Asha. She is a data scientist and loves swimming. She usually decides to go swimming, depending on some combination of weather and work factors. As a data scientist, she wants to identify the circumstances that make her more or less likely to swim. So, Asha begins monitoring her daily activities. Though brushing her teeth, for example, might have some correlation with feeling good and healthy, it most likely does not impact her decision to go swimming. Instead, she identifies factors such as air temperature, humidity, workload, and social commitments to be more relevant for her decision to swim. Asha also believes that weather and social commitments are the greatest contributing factors. But let's not assume, and instead use the CART algorithm to reconstruct her decision-making process. The CART algorithm produces decision trees which closely imitate how most people make decisions. So let us explore which circumstances are most likely to influence Asha's decision to go swimming. Asha collects data for these circumstances for 14 days. And after running the CART algorithm on her data, she finds that the most important factor is air temperature. This is therefore the first split in her decision tree, and comes before all other circumstances in explaining the variation in Asha's swimming pattern. When it's cold, she tends to avoid swimming. When it's warm, she is more likely to swim. Next is humidity. That's the second split. When it's hot and humid, Asha always wants to go swimming. Finally, workload is the next split. When it is cold and she has a high workload, she is least likely to go swimming. Interestingly, after our calculations, social commitment doesn't seem to impact Asha's decision to swim. Our decision trees help us map data in a way that categorizes and creates an intersection of circumstances to lead to a defined outcome. In Asha's case, the combination of warm weather and high humidity always leads to her swimming. And the combination of cold weather with a high workload makes her least likely to swim. Now that we can see the intuition behind the decision trees, let us look at an example of how the CART methodology works in practice. Let's choose the indicator, access to electricity. The CART algorithm uses a splitting criterion to determine which circumstance explains the greatest amount of variance between groups of people who either have or do not have access to electricity. We can see two possible splits for our indicator. The top splits on education. The bottom splits on residence. The residence split results in groups that are more homogeneous. In other words, a place of residence leads to greater differences between population groups than a different level of education. Therefore, residence would become the first split in our LNOB tree. CART analysis doesn't stop at the first split. It analyzes subsequent nodes to see if more variance can be explained from further splits. In the example above, the urban residence node is further split by education, while education isn't as important as residence in the overall sample. It emerges as an important circumstance where we zoom into urban areas. Here we see that it creates a significant gap in accessing electricity, whereas in our rural population, there is no further split of the data. Our LNOB tree did not grow beyond rural areas for one of two reasons. The first possibility is that our sample size is too small to meaningfully follow the statistical process to split further. The second possibility is that the CART algorithm found that the access rate of electricity in the less educated population in rural areas is not much different than the access rate amongst higher educated population in rural areas. In either case, our tree shows us that people living in rural areas are our furthest behind group, with only 25% access to electricity. These are simple examples to explain the theory behind the CART analysis. The LNOB trees on our online tool are more informative and reveal further intersections of circumstances that create disadvantage or advantage for a variety of chosen indicators. The results are available for download in different formats on lnob.unescap.org.
So Asha's swimming example was a little more abstract, but it helps you to see how CART can be integrated into our own daily life. So even in our daily lives, our data can reveal results that are impartial and objective and conflict what we normally assume to be true. So for instance, Asha assumes that her social life impacted her decision to swim, but in fact, the algorithm showed otherwise. We find similar situations when we look at various indicators in our LNOB trees. As we go into detail on our LNOB trees, you will see that the parameters we set for splitting trees have a lot to do with how the results are calculated. So if you recall the electricity example from our video, one of our nodes did not split any further. So this is because of the splitting criterion that we have set for our trees. Our trees have 3 different splitting criterions. The first is that we do not split further than a depth of 6 levels. This means that the tree will only have 6 different nodes, and it'll only go that far. The second is an absolute criterion where the end nodes must have at least 49 observations. If it is less, the tree will not split any further. The last is a relative criterion where our end nodes must have no less than 9% of the weighted sample size. The splitting criterion can change in our analysis depending on which one we are looking at. So for example, we will go into this in detail later, but we have a standard analysis for which we consider 9%, but our other analyses where we incorporate religion, ethnicity, language, we lower that threshold because they have smaller population sizes. So you've probably heard the word indicator and circumstances quite a bit at this point. So before we go any further, I'd just like to clarify what that actually is. This is a list of all the indicators that we look at in our LNOB analysis. These are considered our response variables. And the response variable is essentially the service we are looking at and calculating throughout the tree. So for instance, if we look at basic drinking water, we are looking at who has access to basic drinking water and who doesn't. Our LNOB tree for basic drinking water will always calculate the average access to basic drinking water throughout the splits that we see in the tree. So each one of these indicators listed here connects to an SDG and are categorized into 5 thematic categories. We have basic resources, child and family health, finance, education, and violence against women. We'll be sure to go into more depth with this later. Next, we have our circumstances, and these are what are the conditions that divide our survey population into groups. So they are considered our independent variables. For each indicator, we define which circumstances may impact access, and then we run the algorithm to see what our data says. So for example, when we look at access to electricity in the video, we noted that we are looking at residence, education, and wealth as possible circumstances. And when we run the algorithm would tell us which do impact access and which do not. We often find that it's not a singular circumstance, but an intersection of these circumstances that create disadvantage in access. All of our data that we use comes from DHS or mixed surveys. Most of you are probably familiar with these surveys, but they monitor data for a wide range of indicators in the area of population, health, nutrition, and other factors. The reason we chose these surveys is because the data is uniform and we can easily compare the data points across countries. The data is also easily accessible, and the surveys include a rich set of questions on health, demographic, and basic socioeconomic data, which is available at the household and individual level. These surveys are available for 29 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, which also allows for regional comparability. So let's begin exploring our LNOB trees. So through this sample, I hope you will see how simple they are to read. From this tree, we can see that the first node, what we call the root node, represents the average access rate across the entire sample. So in this case, we are looking at access to electricity, and this node would calculate the average access rate of the entire country, or the entire province, depending on what what region we're looking at, but in this case, let's assume it's the country. So in this case, the access rate for the country is 93%. At every node, our tree splits into two. So as you can see here, number 2 is a branch, and each branch splits the sample survey respondents by a different circumstance. So in this case, the first split was in household wealth. This means that our algorithm found the highest variance amongst groups divided by wealth. So the branch itself adjusts its size based on the proportion of the sample size it represents. The top 60 wealth has 100% access rate to electricity, whereas the bottom 40 wealth only has an 82% access to electricity. And you can see as the tree continues, the branch size also reduces, and this is because the population size is reducing in those groups. So every line that is highlighted in dark gray is considered a node, and it represents a certain group. In this case, the node at 3 is the bottom 40% of household wealth, which has an access rate of 82%. At every node, we calculate the average access to electricity of that group. Our light blue nodes are our furthest ahead node. And you'll see this throughout the tool that blue usually always indicates furthest ahead, and orange always indicates our furthest behind. So this node has an average access to electricity of 100%, which means that this LNOB tree is showing us that 100% of households in the top 60% of household wealth have access to electricity. The light gray nodes at the very right of our tree are our terminal nodes. Our tree continues to split until no variance is seen or our defined splitting criterion is not met. So just a quick reminder of that splitting criterion is we only go up to 6 levels. There must be a minimum of 49 observations, or it is 9% of the weighted sample size. In this case, our terminal node 5 is showing us that the access rate to electricity is 93% for households in the bottom 40% of household wealth and with higher education. Whereas people in the bottom 40% of household wealth with secondary education have an access rate of 86%. Our furthest behind group is always in orange. And as you can see here, our bottom 40 wealth nodes split further by education. Here we saw the most variation between higher and secondary clubbed together and lower education on its own. So therefore, our furthest behind group are those with lower education and in the bottom 40 of household wealth. So next, I'm going to take you through the same example using a feature space diagram. This is just another way to visualize the how the CART algorithm works. And I'm going to keep it simple, just considering 2 circumstances, because if I used any more circumstances, I'd need a 3D interactive software, which wasn't available today. This is just a simplified version of if we did have to view this as as a scatter plot in 2-dimensional space, this is what it would look like. So in this diagram, all of the gray dots are considered our survey population. And in this case, they are households, since we are looking at access to electricity. If we're looking at another indicator, it would be considered individuals, depending on the indicator. So the blue dots are considered yes, our home has electricity, and the orange dots are considered no, our home does not have electricity. So please note that our definitions for having access are guided by the SDGs, and on our tool, which you will see later, you can find the exact definition of what we actually mean by access to electricity or access to any of the other indicators that are listed. So when we run our CART algorithm on the data, it finds that the biggest variance in having access and not having access is when we split the data by wealth. And indeed, when we split the data by wealth, we see that an average of 82% of households in the bottom 40% of wealth have access to electricity, whereas 100% of households in the top 60% of household wealth have access to electricity. Next, we can split the data in 3 different ways when we look at education. So we can either split the data as lower education and secondary grouped together and just higher on its own, or lower education on its own and secondary and higher clubbed together. We can also look at education as just lower, just secondary, just higher education. So our algorithm, when it runs, it checked and all 3 possibilities, and it found that the highest variance was in the second combination, which is lower as one group and secondary and higher as a second group. So our lower educated groups had an access rate of 67%, and our secondary and higher educated groups had an access rate of 88%. Next, our algorithm is going to continue to check if there's any more variance amongst the groups that we define. So in this case, it did indeed find a further variance, difference in variance amongst the secondary and higher population. So it split even further. And in this case, it showed us that our higher educated households had an average access rate of 86%, and our secondary educated population had an average access rate of 86%, and our higher educated population had an average access rate of 93%. So this is just 2 views of the same output. What we see in this feature space diagram is that our furthest behind intersect between the bottom 40% of household wealth and lower educated. And our furthest ahead are comprised solely of the top 60% of household wealth. The difference in our trees is that our algorithm runs on many more circumstances. So though we only see these 2 circumstances in this tree, when we run the algorithm, we are considering many more circumstances, and only the ones that have significant variance show up in our trees. And also, I feel it's a more intuitive and aesthetic way to view the same information. So as much as we love our LNOB trees, it's also important to note what it can and cannot do. So to start off with, our LNOB trees cannot explain causal relationships between our circumstances and a certain outcome. We cannot say for sure that the circumstances our trees split the data with do in fact cause a lack of access. So additional causality analysis is required for this. Our models are not predictive, therefore they are just a way of looking at the data as it is, and it cannot predict what may happen in the future. They also are not easily comparable over time, though we can look at different factors over time, because the splits from an older data set, the groups that we find as the furthest behind in some data sets may be different from others. So for instance, if a group that is the furthest behind in 2015 in access to electricity may be different from the group we are looking at in 2019. But we will go into more detail on how we can use overtime graphs later in the training. So what we can do is we can identify groups of people who share circumstances that create a disadvantage of access, which we believe is a great stepping stone for further investigation and causality analysis. So again, our first step for the process of finding the furthest behind. Our LNOB trees also reveal which circumstances are associated with the biggest gaps in access to basic opportunities. So we can see which groups actually have the largest gap between accessing and not accessing certain opportunities. And lastly, they can help policymakers understand who we need to prioritize when we're making interventions to reduce inequality across these key services and opportunities. So before we have our 5-minute break, We'd like to share with you an overview of what the ESCAP LNOB analysis is. Though we've gone through the CART algorithm together, this was a simplified example to help you understand the algorithm. And on our LNOB tool, you will find extensive data and results to support your work in helping identify the furthest behind. After this video, we will have a short 5-minute break, and my colleague Ermina will guide you through the second part of today's session. Thank you very much.
To support governments and the UN system in the Asia-Pacific region, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific has developed a Leave No One Behind tool. The tool is used to improve the understanding of how various circumstances intersect and create inequalities in access to basic opportunities. Our methodology is grounded in 2 basic propositions. The first is that access to key services should be universal. These services are presented as indicators of opportunities, such as access to healthcare or electricity. We also look at indicators that represent barriers and disadvantages to avoid, such as childhood malnutrition and violence against women. The second proposition is that individual circumstances should not impact access. This means that circumstances such as age, sex, wealth, area of residence, and ethnicity should not discriminate or in other ways limit access to key services. At the root of our LNOB methodology are classification and regression trees, or CART for short. The CART algorithm divides individuals and households with different access levels into distinct groups based on their shared circumstances. The process creates non-stereotypical results that often defy our assumptions about who the furthest behind and furthest ahead are in accessing opportunities and avoiding barriers. As part of our tool, we also measure inequality in access to the same opportunities and barriers by using the so-called dissimilarity index, or D-index for short. The D-index provides a single number of inequality, similar to the Gini coefficient, for income inequality for each indicator. This allows for easy comparisons across countries over time, or between provinces in a single country. The 2 primary data sources to carry out these analyses are the multiple indicator cluster surveys and demographic and health surveys. DHS and MICS are publicly available for many Asian and Pacific countries. What makes our tool unique is that it generates results that are visually attractive and easy to interpret. By approaching inequality and exclusion from different angles, the LNOB methodology and D-index gives us a comprehensive tool for more effective policymaking. The non-biased view and data disaggregation forces us to pay attention to nuances and tailor policies to specific areas and groups of people. The results are available for download in different formats on lnob.unescap.org.
Welcome back, everyone. I think our 5 minutes are done. I'll start slowly so that those who are still grabbing coffee can join. And I will actually start with asking you to get out your other device if you have one, or use the and take a picture of the code, the QR code that you see on your screen, because we're about to start using the Mentimeter, the interactive part of our presentation. And we will start with a simple question, a very simple question to get everyone warmed up. So again, how to use the Mentimeter and how you can participate. So you have two options. You can use the QR code that you see on your screen right now. The QR code will take you to the Mentimeter page where you can add in your answer. Now, the second option is to follow the link that you will see soon in the chat, and that link will also take you directly to the Mentimeter page. But the problem with that is that you will temporarily leave the meeting browser, right? If you use the link from your computer. It doesn't matter as long as you don't forget to return here when you're done. So the first question we have for you, and we invite you to go to Mentimeter and answer it, is what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the phrase LNOB, or leaving no one behind in Mongolia? If you have managed to go to Mentimeter, you should be able to see the question, and perhaps slowly we will start seeing your answers coming in. I'll give you a minute or so to get the Mentimeter to work. I see a first response. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have equality and inequality, children, herders, poor people, injustice. We have persons with disabilities, people who are not educated, rural populations, discrimination. These are great answers. Survivors of gender-based violence, low health. Very interesting. You can also write the words in Mongolian if you want. Obviously, English, it's better because I can read it, but Mongolian you will understand as well. What we see emerging is a very interesting world bubble with the word equality in the middle, which is also our starting point. All right, very nice. I do want to ask you if you have any questions, and to remind over from what Sajal was saying earlier, if you have any questions regarding how to use the Mentimeter, you can put them on the chat. And if you have any questions generally regarding the material, you can put them in the chat as well, in the chat box of the Zoom call. I just want to remind you that because we haven't seen any questions yet, and it is a very technical and difficult topic. I know as we go through and as we start using examples from Mongolia, possibly more questions will come, and we will have time at the end of today, and also even more at the end of tomorrow, to go through your questions. So if you're saving them, that's okay as well. But just so you know, you can always use the Zoom chat to ask your questions, either regarding a technical question regarding the presentation, or a substantive question about the methodology, about the results you're seeing in your screen, etc. So I think at least some people have managed to use the Mentimeter, and which is good. Hopefully, even more will for the next ones. And all right, then I'm moving on, not because I don't want to see more answers, but because this was just a warm-up question. What we want to do now is go through the core results for Mongolia. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to recap a couple of things that Sejal has mentioned already, but contextualize them for the data that we have available for Mongolia. So to find the furthest behind, as you know, we start with defining the development areas that we're concerned about. And for this analysis, we focused on 5 themes: access to basic resources, child and family health, education, finance, and violence against women. And these are the thematic areas that we have also incorporated. This is how we've grouped our indicators also on our lnob.unescap.org website, where you can find these results. Let's look at the list of indicators under each thematic area. I think we first, you already heard a bit from Sejal, but I just want to take you through the core differences between the categories. So access to basic resources is measured primarily at the household level. So it includes, for example, access to clean water, basic sanitation, etc. So these are all household-based indicators. Then we have child and family health right next to it. So this is this includes a range of indicators. It includes questions on women's sexual and reproductive health. And for that, we're focusing on women 15 to 49 years old, and on children's anthropometric measures. So for those, we focus on children 0 to 5. You will also find on the tool a new indicator that we developed recently, the ability to protect from COVID-19 or COVID preparedness index. This is an indicator that we developed at ESCAP that combines some indicators that define, let's say, a household's ability, or an individual's rather, ability to take some key measures like hand washing, being in a non-crowded household, etc., to protect from contracting a contagious disease. Explanations for that are also on the website. And then we have education, which is also measured at the individual level. It covers several age groups, as you will see. We have finance. Finance areas include owning a bank account or accessing financial services through mobiles. And we also have violence against women, which includes a range of indicators at the individual level. Women, again, 15 to 49, depending on the survey that's available. So these indicators were selected in our overall analysis because of their relevance to the SDGs, right? For example, access to electricity is an indicator because Goal 7 of the UN SDGs calls for universal access to affordable and sustainable modern energy. And then we have specifically indicator 7.1.1, which refers to electricity coverage. So each LNOB tree is constructed around a single indicator. Most of the indicators we're looking at are opportunities, meaning that more access is better. And the goal here is universal access. Everyone should have access to these opportunities. However, we also have some that are barriers. This means that these are negative outcomes that no one should have to face or be exposed to. The lower the prevalence of these indicators, the better. And ideally, no one should experience them. So it should be 0. An obvious example is stunting or overweight in children. Again, a recap on the circumstances that we're using to measure inequality in these indicators. The LNOB tree splits survey data into various groups defined by their shared circumstances, for example, age, sex, and area of residence. Here you can see the list of circumstances used by the algorithm to create the LNOB trees. And we have selected these circumstances because they're available in the mixed survey. But we also have some other criteria for them. The most important is that they should be circumstances that the households or the individuals have little or no control over. So something that it's not something they can immediately change, as refers to this referring to this indicator, because for example, you can always change your education. This is a more fluid circumstance. But at the moment when the indicator is being measured, you cannot go back to school for a few years and finish secondary. This is your education is given. So that's why we say you have little or no control over at the moment, at the minute, at the time when the survey is taken, and around this time frame. Of course, the circumstances should also be relevant for the SDGs. For example, many SDGs ask for disaggregation by sex or residence, and therefore we've made sure we've included sex and residence there. An important point which I think you've understood by now, but one of the key elements of this methodology is that the circumstances also interact and intersect with each other to define the composition of specific groups whose access to opportunities we measure. For example, women with lower education is one of the possible groups created when considering the circumstances, education, and sex. Okay, in the trees we will be exploring for Mongolia, we use primarily these circumstances. Age groups, you will see the age groups defined. Now, depending, there's two boxes on age groups. This is because depending on the indicator we study, we define groups, age groups differently as a circumstance. Then for education, the split is the same, no matter what indicator. It's lower secondary and higher, or combinations thereof. But again, the education can refer to different people, different individuals, depending on the indicator. So when we're looking at a women's sexual and reproductive health indicator, we're only looking at the education of the woman. We're not looking at the education of her children or of the household, etc. When we're looking at household indicators, we're looking at the highest education level in the household. It could be the household head, it could be a child who's living in the household, but it's the highest education level in the household. When we're looking at sex, well, it's very simple, male or female, boy or girl. It's very binary in these surveys. In terms of children, we're looking at the number of children in the household under 5 for some indicators, and the number of children born to the mother in some women-related indicators. And finally, we're very lucky that for Mongolia, we have a mixed survey available because it asks questions on ethnicity, religion, or language spoken in the household. And we have rerun the analysis using these additional circumstances to see if they affect or change our results significantly. Okay, now let's zoom back to the indicators. And I know I've shared the whole list, but not all of the indicators represented were available or meaningful to analyze for Mongolia. And in this table, which refers to 2013, you will see on the left the list of indicators we were able to explore and for which we have trees, and we will zoom into those. Data were not available for the indicators that are on the very right, because these are usually asked by DHS surveys. But the ones in the middle, the data were available. The problem, it's a good thing. Mongolia has universal access. So in Mongolia, we find universal access. So everybody, all women, or near universal, all women can deliver with skilled birth attendance, and no child or very few children were found to be wasted. Therefore, these two indicators, there's no point in creating LNOB trees for them. In 2018, the situation or the list is very, very similar. It's exactly the same. The difference is that we have the COVID-19 preparedness indicator because COVID hit. We didn't know in 2013. So, all right. Let's look at the tool and the results now. These results are all on lnob.unescap.org, but I suggest you stay with me in this presentation and we will have the chance to go through the website together in a few minutes. And I will direct you to the website as well. But I know having Mentimeter and website may be a lot, so you can also stay with the presentation if that's easier. I'm sorry, just to highlight which indicators we will be focusing on: basic drinking water from basic resources, stunting from child and family health, bank account at the household level from finance, and early childhood education from education. Finally, violence against women considered justified from the violence against women group of indicators. Now, all the data we use, as we said, come from the 2018 multiple indicator cluster survey for Mongolia. We choose this survey because the data are uniform for the most part, and therefore we can easily compare data points across countries and over time in the case of Mongolia. Let's see, the 5 indicators that we will be focusing on have specific questions in the mixed survey. So for basic drinking water, the question is, or the definition that we give is aligned to more indicator 1.4.1 for those who are familiar on basic access. And it's about an improved source that is available with a collection time of not more than 30 minutes for a round trip, including queuing. And the technologies, there's a list of technologies that are considered improved, for example, piped water, boreholes or tube wells, protected dug wells, protected springs, and packages or delivered water. For early childhood education, the question that the survey asks is, has the child ever attended kindergarten or any alternative ECE program? For bank account, the question is, does any member of this household have a bank account? Stunting is a measure of height for age for children aged 0 to 5. And if the ratio is more than 2 standard deviations below the average of children, they're considered stunted. And finally, the question we use for violence against women is, I'm sure many of you may have seen this question. It's a sensitive question about women themselves who may consider that a husband is justified to hit the woman. And the question goes like this: sometimes a husband is annoyed or angered by things that his wife does. In your opinion, is a husband justified in hitting or beating his wife in the following situations? And the list of situations is given: if she goes out without telling him, most importantly, if she burns the food. These are the types of questions, but it's about women's perceptions themselves. If there is a justification, if the women consider it justified in any of these 5 circumstances. It doesn't mean that it happens. It means that the woman considers it justified. So let's start with our first 3, and with basic drinking water. So, okay, the reference group for this indicator is households. The circumstances that we use is wealth, level of education, and residence. You can see our parent node. It shows an 83% access to basic water in the country. Our furthest behind group, if you follow, but you can also read obviously here, has a 49% rate of access. And these are households in rural areas who belong to the bottom 40% of the wealth distribution. Our furthest ahead group, the blue little dot, the blue end node at the top of the tree, has an access rate of 97%. So 97% of these households have access to basic water. and it consists of higher educated top 60 urban households. So in this case, being in rural areas and bottom 40 is enough for a household to be in the furthest behind group. And so education level does not matter enough to create a further split. So in our analysis in general, as Sejal said, the tree will not split any further if further split is not significant, or if that node has either fewer than 49 observations or represents less than 9% of the population we are studying. In this case, the population we are studying is households, all of households. So here in this case, the size of the group was large enough, but no further splits were statistically significant for the case of the bottom 40 who were in rural areas. Okay, now let's look at stunting, another indicator. And this indicator is a barrier. So the ideal, as we said, is for no child under 5 to be stunted. The reference group for this indicator is children 0 to 5, so this is our population. The circumstances considered by the algorithm to build this tree are wealth, residence, wealth of the household, right? Residence, sex of the child, mother's level of education, and number of children under 5 in the household. So if this child that's being studied or these children that are being studied have siblings, but the numbers that you'll see is the total number of children in the household. Our parent node shows a 10% rate of stunted children in Mongolia. And our furthest behind group, if you follow the branches of the tree, has an 18% rate, and it consists of boys in the bottom 40% of the wealth distribution, and in households with 2 or more children under 5 in total. The furthest ahead group consists of girls in the top 60 of the wealth distribution, and only 5% of them are stunted. Mother's education and residence does not seem to matter, so there is no further split based on those indicators, which is an exception for Mongolia. Actually, in other countries we see mother's education matter a lot, but this probably is because the level of education among women in Mongolia tends to be higher anyway, as you will see maybe if you explore the trees. So that was not a significant enough factor, but other factors are. So the next tree is the early childhood education tree. For this indicator, children aged 36 to 59 months are considered, and the circumstances we used for the analysis are again wealth of the household, residence, sex of the child, mother's education, and the number of children under 5. So very similar because we're again looking at children. The parent node shows a 74% rate of children attending early education in Mongolia. Among the furthest behind group, however, only 30% attend early childhood education. And the group consists of children who live in poorer households in rural areas and have a less educated mother primarily. The furthest ahead group consists of boys who live in a richer top 60 household with a more educated mother, higher education in this case, attend early childhood education, and 89% of whom attend, and 89% of whom attend early childhood education. So this is another example of the few that we've selected to show you. Now, let's navigate the tool together. And I think this is where I ask those of you who are comfortable, you can go to open another browser and open lnob.unescap.org. You can also follow me here. I'm gonna show a little bit this screen share some screen recording of how you can select indicators, but I think it's very straightforward. If you go to the website, you can immediately see the spots where you can choose an indicator, choose a country, and choose a year. In this example, we choose Afghanistan, but you can select something from Mongolia, like early childhood education or stunting, just to see the trees we just spoke about. You can see the tree, and on the top blue bar, you see national analysis. That's where we are. You see the various nodes, the furthest ahead group, and the furthest behind group. To the right, you would see data insights. So what this means is that you see a description of what we had in the tree. So a description of who the furthest behind are, who the furthest ahead are. And under the tree, there's a tab called Information. And if you click on that, you'll see all the information you need to know about this indicator. What is the reference group? What is the SDG it refers to? What are the circumstances that were used for splitting the tree? You know, what are the circumstances we put in the algorithm? Even if not all of them were used by the algorithm, still you will see the full list of circumstances that were considered by the tree. And again, the other thing is that if you hover over the nodes, I hope you're all on the website and looking at the tree. And so if you hover over the nodes, any node, you can see information on the size of each group, meaning what share of the population they represent and how many unweighted observations are there. Okay, I hope you have managed to do that, because we are going to do a little quiz. And I suggest the quiz that we have. I hope you can see it. You can go to Mentimeter. Again, you can either go to menti.com and use the code that you see on the screen. You can also, I think maybe one of my colleagues might share the link to the Mentimeter on the chat, so you can see it there as well. And we would like you to go to the indicator on the platform, ownership of a bank account at the household level. And we'll give you a minute to look at the tree that shows up. So select bank account, Mongolia 2018, and look at the tree and try to see who is the furthest behind in ownership of a bank account. And there's 3 possible answers: households with secondary or lower education, households with secondary education, or households with lower education. And take a careful look at the tree and see if you can answer which one is correct. I'll give you a minute. Or you can put your answer in the chat, as that is fine as well, if you're having problem with Mentimeter. But we'd like you to try. Okay, maybe it's time to show the results. Okay, most of you were correct, but there were some mixed results. I think maybe some people were maybe confused by the tree. So let's look at the tree. This is the tree for bank account ownership. So the first split in the tree is made on education level, and you will see you have higher education that has the highest access rate and secondary or lower education that has a lower access rate. But you will also see that then the secondary or lower education splits further again on education. So this was a little bit tricky and a little bit difficult, but we wanted to show you how each branch narrows down to the furthest behind. So first you have secondary education or lower education, and that is higher access. And you will see also the thickness of the bar of the branch is quite high, because the thickness of the branch of the trees also represents the people in that, the individuals in this case, the households in that group. And then there's a further split, and the lower educated households, which is a very thin branch. So not many households only have a lower educated members in them. Nevertheless, this is the group that is furthest behind. So the correct answer was households with lower education. Right? This one, the last one. Okay, let's do another test. This time, I would like you to look at violence against women justified. So again, everyone please go to the drop-down menu and select in the platform and select violence against women justified. So at lnob.unescap.org, select violence against women justified, Mongolia, 2018. And this question now is more complex a little bit. It's what is the percentage point gap between the furthest ahead and the furthest behind? So it's simple maths, but you have to find the furthest behind group and the furthest ahead group and find their access rates. Or in this case, it's not access, but we call it prevalence, because it's something that nobody should have. Ideally, no woman should think that violence against them is justified. But we wanted to see if you can measure the gap between the two. And we have, again, it's easy, it's multiple choice. So even by chance, maybe, unless maybe by chance you can find it. My recommendation is to not do it by chance. It is to actually go in and check the trees and write your answer. What do you think is the gap, the distance, or the difference? I see 7 people have voted. Okay, 9. I'll give you 1 more minute or 30 more seconds.
Just one quick message. The interpretation is a little bit shaky. The connection is in and out. So we were wondering if, I think Bulgan is currently doing it, if we could switch to Selenge for the interpretation, because the connection was more stable then.
Okay, I hope it is better now. I hope people can hear me and the interpreters can talk. I'm going slowly, and we will have many more of these trees. So I hope you'll have another opportunity to follow if you haven't followed me so far. But we do have 11 answers. So I'm going to show results and see what we have. Show results. There you are. Yes. All right. I do have the tree, thankfully. Okay, here is the answer. The gap between the furthest behind and the furthest ahead is 23% furthest behind minus 4% furthest ahead, and that is 19. So 19 percentage points. So thank you. I mean, it's great. I think many of you got it right. So it's really good. But I think it's important to understand that just the key statistic that you see in every tree is this number, right? The one that you don't have to hover over, you don't have to do anything. It just shows up when you look at the tree. And that number is the access rate or the prevalence rate in this case of that group. So in this case, the furthest behind group was bottom 40 lower educated women, right? 23% of them thought that it's justified for their husbands to hit them. That is the rate for this group. If we went back to just generally bottom 40 group, that was 15%, right? So it depends. So every number that you see on every node, this is the actual access rate of that group or prevalence rate in this case. In this case, higher is worse. So I hope it is clear, at least for many of you. For most of you, we'll have more chances because now we're going to the sub-regional level, subnational level. So now we'll have the chance to see these indicators, how they differ between provinces or areas within Mongolia. The LNOB analysis has been repeated based on the provinces that are given to us by the MIX survey. A question for you is, among these 5 provinces, rank the 3 ones that you would like us to explore. We'll be looking at early childhood education at the province level. So which ones would you like us to explore? Central, Eastern, Khangai, Ulaanbaatar, Western? Oops, sorry, here. Voting is closed. I did not. Nope. Now you can vote. You can also write in the chat if you don't want to vote. Oh. Okay, we have Western first. Let's see. Maybe there is no strong preference and we let the 2 people decide. Okay, Ulaanbaatar is moving up. Western is still first. I think that may mean that we have to go for Western. I don't see any change. So closing the voting, let's do Western and Ulaanbaatar. That was Central. That was Eastern. Kangai. Ulaanbaatar. Okay, let's do Western first. In the Western province, the average attendance of early childhood education is 61%. That is our parent node. There's a total of 695 children in the survey for the Western region, right? It's more than other regions. So we have a good enough sample, even though it's a small age group. It's only children at this age group. Only 17% of boys whose mother has lower education attend early childhood education. By contrast, 94% of children whose mother has higher education and who live in urban areas attend early childhood education. If I may say, this gap is huge. This gap is really big. It's among the highest ones we see actually, from 94% to 17%. So there's clearly a lot of inequality there. You'll see though with the thickness of the branches, right, that most of the, especially in terms of education, most of the mothers, because this is mother's education, are highly educated or secondary educated. They have either higher or secondary education, and a much smaller branch at the bottom for lower education. Nevertheless, the gap is really big. Let's go back to Ulaanbaatar to see that other province, it's the capital, and see what the gaps are there. So in Ulaanbaatar, the average attendance of early childhood education is 77%, and that is the parent node. However, only 47% of boys in the bottom 40 of the wealth distribution whose mother has lower or secondary education attend early childhood education. By contrast, 86% of boys whose mother has higher education have access to early childhood education. So in this case, being a boy or girl matters. An interesting observation for Ulaanbaatar is that rural urban does not show up, probably because it's an urban primarily area. A number of children under 5 also does not show up. So it doesn't matter how many children are in the household under 5. Okay, so let me see if, yes, it's loading. Maybe my colleagues can help me. We have a question for you, another question for you. We wanted to make sure that that you understand the trees, and if there were also some problems with interpretation, I want you to tell me. Well, it's not, I think it's not loading yet. Okay. Well, the question is, how was the pace of the presentation so far? This is the question, and maybe you can tell us in the chat if it has been too quick, too slow, if you want a couple more trees from early childhood education, or if we're okay to keep going with exploring the tool. So your feedback right now, you can probably put it in the chat if you think it's too fast, if you'd like to repeat something, if there's a question that is burning that you would like to ask.
The question is also working, I think, in Mentimeter. It's just maybe it's not working on our side.
All right, let's see. Oh yeah, it is, but I cannot see the results. So listen, I think silence probably means that the pace is good. Let's see if I'm right, if this manages to load. 12 people have voted. Okay. All right. If nobody writes in the chat that I must slow down, I assume that it's okay to continue, right? And if so, my colleagues can interrupt me, right? If you hear otherwise. Thank you. All right, coming back to the presentation then. All right, let's go back to the platform now to see what other information we can find. We focused a lot on these few indicators, but we know you're interested in the other indicators as well. So we want you to go back to the platform and choose an indicator from Mongolia, and then navigate down all the way to other indicators. And to do that, as you'll see in the blue bar, when you choose an indicator first, it will take you to the analysis page, right? And then in the blue bar, you see national analysis, subnational analysis. We've seen those two already. You also see regional analysis, no need to click on that yet, but you also see other indicators. So this is where we'd like you to go. All right, so you will see different representations in this other, among other indicators. You had a glance there at the video. I'll show you a few now. So this graph, this graph is one of our most loved ones, if I may say. We used to call it the standard graph because we used it for everything, but well, our web developers preferred box plots. It's a drier name, but it is a box plot. It shows a snapshot of access for the furthest behind and the furthest ahead groups across all the indicators for which there are available data for Mongolia. So you will see here on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you will see all the indicators that we're considering. On the x-axis, we have the rate of access or prevalence for the indicator we're looking at. And the orange color represents the access rate of the furthest behind, whereas the blue one indicates the access rate of the furthest ahead. Please give me a second, I need to charge my computer. Very important detail. And the gray dot in the middle is the average, right? So we have highlighted here the example of early childhood education for a reference for you. But you can see that this is not the highest gap. Clean fuels, actually, and internet usage have higher gaps for Mongolia. 74 percentage points for one and 84 percentage points for clean fuels. Another graph that you will see if you click the next tab under other indicators is the overtime analysis. So this overtime graph explores the progress between the earlier survey, the 2013 survey, and the newer survey, the 2018 one. What do we see in this graph? So the orange dots, or the orange, let's say, line, shows the rate of the furthest behind group. The gray one shows the average rate. So it's very difficult to measure progress over time for furthest behind groups because it's there's many ways one could measure that. What we chose to do the simplest way perhaps, is to look at the distance between the furthest behind group and the country average, not the furthest ahead group, which we know is usually, in most cases is above 80%, 90%. But let's say the average of the country, it's a good benchmark. So are the furthest behind groups catching up to the average of the country, or are they falling behind? This is what we're trying to see. And the way it's sorted is that the indicators you see further up are the ones where the gap is actually increasing between the two surveys, whereas in the bottom, towards the bottom of the graph, you see the indicators for which the gap is decreasing. So it's an improving situation. Here we observe improvement in 7 indicators, so electricity, bank account, secondary and tertiary education, and worsening situation in 5 indicators, so early childhood education, internet usage, basic drinking water, clean fuels, basic sanitation. So again, this is not, it doesn't mean that there's no progress, because although in some of them you'll see that even the furthest behind groups are actually regressing. But even though there's progress, some groups the furthest behind groups are left further behind from the average. The average grows faster. Okay, and finally, let's review the regional analysis. And this is the last title we have in our analysis page. So for the regional analysis, you can see, hopefully, the graph here. Again, the same trick. You select your indicators, you click on the regional analysis, and you will see the standard graph again, but this time for countries, and the overtime graph. Celsa, my colleague, tomorrow will talk about the D-index and access rates. That will go through tomorrow. But we also have a map, again, of the D-index. More on that tomorrow. Today, we'll focus on the first 2 graphs, the box plot and the overtime graph under regional analysis. All right, here it is. So we've kept this indicator, early childhood education, because it's one of the most interesting we have, also very relevant for many countries. Here, it's a box plot graph. It's similar to the one you saw before, but before we had all the indicators, one country, Mongolia. Here we have all the countries with this indicator, for one indicator, early childhood education. So similar graph, but different information. So you'll see all the countries and the years of the survey on the y-axis. And you can see that Mongolia also has large gaps compared to other countries, similar to Laos, People's Democratic Republic, and similar to Turkmenistan as well. The country with the lowest average access is Afghanistan. You can see it at the very bottom, very little access for average, for the furthest ahead, for the furthest behind. Only 1% of children attend early childhood education. And generally in these graphs, what we see is towards the bottom, when the average access is very, very low, or towards the top, when the average access is very, very high, the gaps are generally smaller. And in the middle, where about half of the country have access to something, the gaps are bigger, right? Because as more people, some people gain access before others, it's expected actually to have gaps. But in some cases, like in this one, even countries with higher average have higher gaps. So it's interesting to observe. This is the overtime graph for the same indicator across countries under regional analysis. Again, it focuses on the distance between furthest behind groups and the average. Has the access of each group increased or decreased? And by how much? And what about the distance from each other? So looking at early childhood education, we only have overtime data for 7 countries, but among them we see that there has been progress across the board, mostly. However, progress has been faster in some countries than others. So it's been faster in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, than in Mongolia and Vietnam, for example. Thailand was starting with the highest level, and while the gap between the furthest behind and the average has increased, even in Thailand, it is still faring better than other countries in this indicator. Okay, now the last thing that you will find in our platform, that hopefully you'll find easier. I don't know if my colleagues can show it once more. It's the overview table. If you see here, you see overview results. And there you can find a summary of who are the furthest behind for your country, for your indicator, and for whatever your selection is. You'll see the blue bar at the top where you can select, and you can choose the country, the year, the indicator. So if you don't want to go through the process of looking at all the trees, summarizing the information of the trees, calculating the gap between the furthest behind and the furthest ahead, this is where you want to go. You want to go to the overview results, and all the calculations have been made for you. So you can select, again, your country and see everything all in one. You can also download the data and delete columns or delete rows if there's some information there that you don't need, and use it directly in perhaps publications, reports. We have found in our interaction with countries that this graph is very useful, because usually, for example, even when you do your analysis in publications, there's not a lot of space. And if you want to summarize things for the LNOB analysis, this is a pretty good summary. It's a lot of trees and a lot of information, including at the subnational level. So having it all in one place, it's kind of useful. Here is the way we usually present it in our presentations. It's a different graph, but and we're hopefully going to work on improving a little bit the visuals of the graph that we have on our website as well, so that it's a little bit more compressed. We welcome your feedback on that, by the way. If you have any suggestions, we would love to see them. If there's any measure you think should be there. Now, last point almost from me is the following. So far, we have seen the LNOB trees that use a standard set of indicators to separate our sample into groups. So we call this the standard analysis. And there is a small variation in the analytical model depending on the indicator, but it's the standard analysis. We have, it's set, let's say. Now, we have the option for the case of Mongolia to include ethnicity, religion, and/or language as additional circumstances. And the reason why we do that is to see if it makes a difference in the results of who the furthest behind are. We realize that it might be sensitive in some circumstances to include this indicator or this circumstance. That's why we have a set of results that does not include this information and a set of results that does include the information, depending on how the user wants to see the results. Okay, let's turn to our website to explore how we show this additional analysis on the website. Now you can select any indicator you want. Again, for Mongolia, let's select maybe overweight. And under the title National Analysis, again, you remember the big bar, it says National Analysis, you will see a drop-down menu with a note, select type of analysis. Exactly. So you will see the new tree emerges, and in the tree, under the information tab, you will see an explanation of what are the additional circumstances that were used. In the case of Mongolia, we have the following religions, that were in the survey, and the following ethnicities. In surveys that we have both ethnicity and language, because they're kind of similar, we, in many cases, we prefer to use ethnicity, but in some cases where we don't have ethnicity, we will use language spoken in the household. This is how we make this distinction. So here we have ethnicity of the household and religion. This is what we use for the case of Mongolia. So if you want, you can go and select any tree. One thing I want to point out is, and as Sajal mentioned, but I think we need to repeat it here, is that for the analysis that is standard analysis without ethnicity and religion, the algorithm stops to make, it doesn't make any more additional partitions if the end nodes, the child nodes, is 9% of the total sample of the population, or 49 observations, right? These are our two golden numbers. Now, for the case of religion, language, and analysis, to be able to capture the furthest behind groups, we allow ourselves to go to a 5% of the total reference population in the end nodes. So we relax a little bit that restriction. We do keep the restriction that is also in the UNICEF mixed survey, 49 absolute value for respondents. It has to be at least 49 unweighted observations in the end node. So we keep that restriction, but we relax a little bit the 9% to be able to go down to 5%, to be able to capture smaller groups that are perhaps not large enough to be included otherwise. Okay, let's look at our overweight tree. So this is again the tree for Mongolia, overweight. This time we have included ethnicity and religion as circumstances. And the way you read the tree is the way, exactly the same way as you would read all the previous trees that we've gone through. The circumstances we consider are, again, wealth of the household, residence, sex, mother's education, number of children under 5, and language, ethnicity in the household. Oh, I see. Okay, I think it's ethnicity, yes. So the parent node shows 11% rate of overweight, right? That is the same whether we consider ethnicity, religion, or we do not. The furthest behind group consists of Buddhist or no religion in the bottom 40 who are Khalq and whose mothers have higher education. The furthest ahead group consists of Muslim or minor religion kids in households with more than 2 children under 5. Only 3% of those children are overweight. So you will see that if you are on the website and click between the standard analysis and the including religion and ethnicity analysis, you will see the difference in the trees. They change. Not all of them change, but many of them change. Here we have run the analysis on bank account, which is one you've looked at before. It is the same indicator, the same sample. The only thing that has changed again is that we have added other circumstances. So we have ethnicity and religion of the household. And in this case, now you will see that the furthest behind group is lower educated Muslim or minor religion. And the furthest ahead group is higher education, Kazakh or Khalq, top 60 rural residents. So it's a different tree from the one that we were exploring earlier, and smaller, thinner branches of the trees, smaller end nodes, more nuanced trees. Finally, this is a clean fuels tree for including ethnicity and religion analysis. Again, you can see the rest on the website, and again, not all of them you will not see a change in all of them, and you will not see religion or ethnicity pop up in all of them, but in some of them you will. Furthest behind group, bottom 40 rural residents, Kazakh or minor ethnicity in terms of clean fuels. And furthest ahead group, top 60 urban residents, higher education, no religion. So these are the new results. The gaps tend to increase when we include ethnicity, religion, or language. Okay, let's move to one of our next questions in Mentimeter. If you remember how to use it, you can again go to menti.com and add the number of the group or follow the link. And this time it's a multiple choice. So we want you to see, and this is a tricky one. So maybe, I hope my presentation was clear, because we'd like you to answer this question. What is the percentage of the population of the furthest behind group in stunting, including ethnicity and religion? So try to look for stunting as an indicator for Mongolia, 2018. And look at the trees and look at the furthest behind group. And then try to tell us what is the share of the population in that group. The share of the reference population, right? Because this is, again, children 0 to 5. It's not everyone in the country. And you have 3 options. And we'd like you to see which one you think is the correct. I'm going to hide the results while you think. I have to confess that when we were doing our test run, I got this wrong. So do not despair if this is difficult. You can write it also on the chat. We have an answer for 22%, which is not one of the options, but it's a bold statement. And I will see I know very well why that is one of the answers. We should have added it to the. Okay. All right, let's reveal. Okay, this is very impressive. It's good. It's great. Because it's not an easy tree to see. Like if you look at the tree, and I don't think, I don't have it in my presentation. So the way the tree is split, it's the furthest behind group is not necessarily the deepest branch. So the tree may continue to grow and the eye may follow the tree, but it's important to look for the color. So in this case, the furthest behind group had an access rate of 6.98% or almost 7%. And I think it is Muslim kids. I don't have I don't have the tree, the actual tree in front of me. But it's important to look for the color, right? The orange color. And when you hover over the node of the orange color, you will see the size of that group. So the size of that group is 7% of all the children that were measured. And this is why this is the correct answer. Well done to those who did it. But I got the 12%. No, yeah, I think that was my mistake. I had followed the other branch and I had gone all the way to this other group that was not the furthest behind group. So that was my mistake. All right, and this is a perhaps more philosophical question for you, again on Mentimeter. Or please, for this one, I think, if possible, if you cannot access Mentimeter, I would be very grateful if you could think about it and write your answer, even in Mongolian, in the chat. Because this is one, in looking at our furthest behind groups, because we're not the ones determining and they're not perfect splits, sometimes the furthest behind groups are very small and in size, but they're also, there's more severity of the problem, meaning that they have much lower access than other groups. And sometimes the population that is furthest behind is a large part of the country's population. So there are groups that represent 20 or 30% of the country, but perhaps are not so far behind, right? So from your perspective, what do you think is worse? If a small part of the population is really far behind, or if a large part of the population is left somewhat behind? I think this question is important because we are also considering looking at groups. Yes, absolutely. What do you think is worse? If a small part of the population is really far behind, so if a small group, very small group, 5%, 6%, 10% of the country is left far behind, or if it's more people, or is it worse if a larger part of the population, so more people, are left behind, but not so much behind? Maybe they have, they're just not catching up with the average. What do you think is worse? More people left somewhat behind, or fewer people, but left much further behind? This is the question. The reason why this question is important for us is because as we develop this analysis, and hopefully with your feedback as well, we want to see how we can explore other groups that are perhaps not already studied, if possible. For example, an obvious one is persons with disabilities. So for persons with disabilities, we have generally this severe disability, or the scaling of the disability. It's maybe not more than, severe disabilities, maybe not more than, 5% of the population, or 10% in some countries. But when the groups are so small, they're very difficult to be captured by the surveys. So for us, it's important to see how we could, or to think, if we should be integrating them into this analysis and relaxing even further, perhaps, our restrictions of the LNOB trees, or alternatively, changing the definition of disability, of what we consider as disability, maybe not severe disability, but any difficulty in accessing some things. But your feedback here is very important for us. I think I see a bit of a consensus, and it's a difficult question. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong, but there is a prevalent opinion that a small part of the population being further behind is perhaps worse. Possibly, it's a difficult one, and I'm glad you took the time to answer, and thank you. Okay, I think we've been very efficient. And we have come to the end of my presentation. Now for tomorrow, we want to ask you if there are any other indicators or ideas for future analysis. We would like you to bring these questions to us, or any other technical questions. You can bring those to the coffee break. If there's something that you'd like to, I know I see the chat, while I've not been looking, has been quite active. So I'm very glad to see that there's been a lot of questions while I've been presenting these results. But if there's any question that has not been answered, or if there's something that we can come back to, please let us know now. You can also think about everything, but particularly because we'd like to engage with Mongolia in the future more, obviously, with this analysis. Particularly, we'd like you to think if there's an area of work that is perhaps beyond the indicators that you've seen here, but that is available in the mixed survey that we have, where we could immediately assist you with, or any other customization and type of analysis that you'd like to see. Okay, so it was one vote for the, it's a difficult problem, right? It's a difficult thing to, it's a difficult question. I don't think there is right or wrong, but thank you for the vote. Okay, so right, so we have your questions, and I think we have also some food for thought for ourselves in the chat, and whatever else you're going to bring to us tomorrow. One last question before we break for today, or well, we go for today and see you tomorrow. We'd like you to go to Mentimeter, or again, type in the chat, again, what is the one word that best describes the LNOB methodology, if you can. We'd like to have an idea of what you thought of this analysis that you've seen so far. Was it difficult, exciting, terrible? No, please don't write that. It will hurt me. But you can be critical. Feel free to be critical. Thank you. Thank you. That's what we hope as well. And that's what we like about it, that it's systemic. Okay, this is very nice. Thank you. I'm going to save this. It's a very nice and word bubble to end with. Okay, need more practice. and complex indeed. Thank you very much. This is very nice and encouraging for us. Tomorrow we will have the chance to hear about the D index, which is also extremely exciting, I think, because one of our big challenges is to communicate these results, and the D index is a great measure that is somehow very intuitive, perhaps more intuitive than the trees. And we think that you will find it very, very useful. I don't know if Sajal, do we have any other housekeeping or anything else from your side?
No, I think that was a nice and comprehensive overview of the tool. I think tomorrow it would be great for you guys to all join us as well at the same time. We, as Ermina mentioned, will go through the D index as well. And we also have a coffee break afterwards. So tomorrow's session is just an hour and a half long, but we have an optional coffee break of 30 minutes where you can ask, you know, if as you're digesting this information today, and if there's any questions that come up on the CART methodology, on the D index, or on any of the details of the analysis, please feel free to come and discuss that with us directly during that coffee hour, or coffee half an hour, whatever it takes. But that's it from my side as well.
Thank you, Sajal, and we'll study your comments on the chat as well and see how we can come back with some more ideas if we can. Okay, thank you all very, very much for staying with us for these 2.5 hours, a little more, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Goodbye.